Hello, my name is Jessica, and I'm going to be showing you how I take a ball of clay and turn it into a cylinder or a cup shape. I start by protecting my pants with a few washcloths on either side because it's going to get very wet very soon. I have pre-wedged and shaped my balls of clay at 1 1/4 pound, which I think is a pretty good size for a beginner. Here I'm using the bat system, which is my preferred method because beginners don't risk deforming their piece as they remove it from the wheel. I'm starting off by just cleaning it off, making sure that there's not any dry clay on it, and I really want to make sure that it has just the slightest bit of dampness. That dampness will help suction the clay ball to the bat surface. And here I'm rubbing a little bit of clay into that water too so that I can help see where the center of the bat is. This will help me aim when I inevitably take my ball and throw it onto there. So here I am, dry hands, taking that ball back and forth to get a ball shape. And I'm just gonna absolutely wham it onto that bat. A big problem is clay going flying while sintering, and a good whack can prevent this. I kind of wiggle it back and forth to get that suction, and then I slowly rotate as I chop. This is a pre-sintering technique that helps you make sure you're as close to center as you can be before being in motion. So now that I have it on there, I'm going to anchor my elbow into my hip and take my very wet sponge. I'm going in from the top with my right hand and in from the side with my left hand, squeezing while pushing down. My left hand palm is just a hard surface I'm forcing the clay onto. I use the squash method as opposed to the coning method, which tends to be a little bit easier for beginners. I am aiming for that tuna can shape. My elbow is anchored the entire time into my hip bone because we need that stability. Floppy arms tend to make sloppy art. So here I am using a lot of water, and I'm going to be diving down into the clay using 2 fingers, hooking my thumb onto my other hand for that stability. I go down to what I think is 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch, and I gently open it up by pulling toward my body. At this point, I'll go in and check the depth of the clay with a needle tool to make sure, or just check and see if I'm close. Here I am, so I go add more water, always add more water, and gently go in and compress the bottom of that clay with a finger back and forth. This compression helps reduce the risk of S-cracks and also helps you navigate and determine how wide you want your cup to be. So I use 2 fingers hooked onto the other hand to gently pull that open to my desired width. With pulling, you really want your interior and exterior fingers gently pinching the clay together at a semi-fast speed with lots of water. A bead will form, and you will gently drag this bead upward. Always, always, always use more water. When you feel it getting dry, that can really ruin a good pull. Here I am taking that up and bringing it all the way up. Usually it'll take 2 or 3 pulls to get all of that clay up to an even consistency. So something I like to do is I like to hook my wet sponge in between my fingers as I pull so that I have a steady drop of water. It's really important to work as a unit with both of your hands to get that bead all the way up to the top. Once you get all the way up to the top, I'll generally take my sponge and kind of reduce any excess slip that has built up on the clay body. And once I have that second pull done, I use one hand to try to gently support the clay as I go in and remove any excess water sitting at the bottom. We don't want any water sitting at the bottom for too long because it could reduce the integrity of it over time and increase the risk of S-cracks. So I'm going in and I'm going to grab the flared base called the skirt, pulling up one more bead of clay all the way up to the top, using my fingers to make sure it is a nice uniform thickness all the way from the bottom to the top. Once everything feels good, I take my skirt away with a wooden point tool. Some clay is not worth trying to pull up and can just make your life a little bit harder, so I always recommend beginners trim their skirt instead of trying to pull it up. So I just kind of, once I get that done, I'll wet my hands and kind of hug the clay body to wet it all down evenly. At this point, the cylinder is ready to be designed a roll. In this case, I decided to make it a cup. I decided to do something a bit more fun with an angular kind of feel. So I take my wooden rib tool and just gently get rid of any slip on the outside of the clay body, wet that rib up, and then with lots of water, just make sure the fingers never stick to the clay. From the inside, I push that clay up against the stationary rib to create the shape of the cup. Going from the bottom and then doing the top. Once satisfied with the shape, it's time to gently compress the rim. Compression is important to make sure that the rim is sturdy, it gets rid of excess slip, and even some excess or some unevenness that may have arisen. Just using a gentle pinching motion with my 2 fingers and guiding it from the other side with my other finger. I'm going to get rid of any excess water that may have arisen, because that is honestly a really big problem for beginners. Here I am compressing that rim, just making sure everything looks good, feels good on the mouth when you go to use it as a cup. And then finally, I'm going to be taking my finishing sponge and using that to get rid of any sort of texture that I might not like on the exterior of the cup. This can be done with a metal rib tool or a silicone rib tool too, but I kind of prefer just a very light texture, a light amount of texture on a cup. So I prefer the finishing sponge instead. So once finished, I remove my bat and let that sit for an hour or two before I wire it off. Helps reduce the risk of deforming, and I call it a cup. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate your time.